Hi everyone, I thought we'd do another Q&A video, so I'll get straight to it. Here's a question from Gitan Jazz, and this was on Instagram. And he asks, would love to hear how to start improvising rather than memorizing licks. A huge gap. Yeah, so that's a really good question and an interesting topic to talk about. I guess if I talk a little bit about improvising in general first, and if we go back to when I first picked up a guitar when I was a kid, I think really improvising was something that I always did, really, and I think it's probably the same for a lot of people, especially kids when they pick up instruments for the first time. You learn where a few notes are on the fingerboard, and almost immediately you're playing around with those notes. You're changing the order of the notes, you're applying slightly different rhythms, or you're adding notes, you're trying to come up with riffs, and essentially that's kind of what improvising is at the core. I didn't do a lot of kind of exercises or etudes or this kind of thing. I didn't really follow a book page by page when I learnt to play. I was just kind of learning things I liked and then mucking around with them, and that's kind of still how I approach it to this day, to be honest. But that probably doesn't answer the question very well, because from a practical point of view that isn't much help. So I'll talk a little bit about how we can take an idea, a line, a lick, a phrase, and digest it to the point where it becomes more than just a memorized lick, which is what we really are trying to do, especially in jazz music. We can learn all these licks and lines, but when you're on a gig and you're in the moment, you want to be able to improvise. You don't want to just be copy and pasting licks. That's not the goal at all. If you learn some big complicated lick and it only works if you start on a certain beat of a certain bar over a certain chord change at a certain tempo in a certain key, then it's not a lot of use to you, really, because what are the chances of that coming up, on a gig? And then even if it does come up on a gig, you sound great for a bar and a half, but you've got to play the whole gig. So it's how do we turn these ideas into something that's more useful to us as improvisers? And so if I take a really simple phrase, something like this. Okay, so that's over an A minor. Very simple phrase, kind of gypsy jazz-esque. What we can start doing is break it right down into tiny concepts, if you will. Take, for example, the first few notes. Okay, so what's going on there? So we're starting on a chord tone. This is a 5 of A minor. Okay? Then we're going like this. Now to me, when I hear that phrase, this last note we land on is what I consider a target note. It's the 3rd of A minor. Now these two, this is the 9 and this is the 11, or the 2nd and the 4th. These two are basically enclosing that 3rd, the 3rd of the chord. So in a way you can kind of think of this line, this very simple line, as being a chord tone, a target round another chord tone. So suddenly these are just what, 1, 2, 3, 4 notes. This has become actually more of a concept than a specific line. Now we can apply that concept to any other chord tones. So let's do it down. Instead of starting on the 5 and doing that, let's start on the 3rd and enclose the 1. Okay, and I've gone a semitone below here. a scale tone above, and there's the one, the one note, the A note. So now obviously that's quite an obvious one to hear, it makes sense, you know. But let's expand a little bit more on the idea, let's give some other variations. So let's, instead of going down, let's target this note, but instead of going below and above, and by the way, this is, you can look at this as two ways. This can either be a scale tone below, a scale tone above, and the note, which is what, 2, 4, 3 of the scale of A minor. You can also think of that as a semitone below and a scale tone above. So that would depend where else you apply this. You could go a scale tone below, a scale tone above, or a semitone below, semitone above. Let's try a semitone below, a semitone above, and then hit the note. Okay, that one sounds a bit strange. I wouldn't say strange, but a little different maybe, actually. That certainly sounds more kind of in keeping with the chord. But this is what we experiment. We come up with different ideas. Let's try not going below, but let's just go chromatics down to the note. Now, we talked about chromatics in the last video. Okay, so there are two variations of the same concept in my eyes. Okay, that's slightly different chromatic notes. Okay, but essentially what's happening is we're thinking in chord tones. The last part of that little line is a descending arpeggio of A minor. It's the 1, it's the 5, 3, 1. Okay, so what else can we do? Let's go. Okay, so here we've gone, instead of down an arpeggio like that, we've gone, so I've added a 7th note here, and I've just changed the kind of order of the notes. Again, it's a variation of the same concept. The concept is the most important thing, and the notes can vary. Okay, that was 5, 4, 5. Let's try 5 semitone 5. Okay, let's add to it. Okay, and I'm just using notes that are kind of strong over an A minor. There's lots of variations we can do, and so when we're improvising, it's more use to have these ideas as kind of general concepts rather than copy and paste lines. I feel if you learn things in concepts and ideas, they mean more. You understand them more, so therefore they're more use. And you can bend them and twist them and connect them together and create melodies and lines that way. So that's kind of the way I approach my approach to kind of learning vocabulary. It's I'll learn a little phrase from somewhere. I might hear something on a record I really like. I'll go figure it out. I think, right, what chord is it over? What's going on there? I don't just learn it note for note and that's it. I break it right down. What's happening? What how can I change it? How can it be useful to me? Which bits do I prefer? You might just prefer certain 3 or 4 notes of a longer sequence, a longer phrase, sorry, etc, etc. It goes on and on and on. So that's kind of how you take a memorized idea and then turn it into something more useful to you. There are of course other approaches to improvising. Another good way is to sing as you play. Now you don't have to sing out loud. I'm not a very good singer, so but I think what what you can keep it under your breath, but I often do this when I play, and what that does is it immediately makes you play in phrases, because you have to breathe. See, it's easy as a guitar player just to keep going and going and going, and notes after notes after notes, but singers can't do that because they have to breathe. And if you speak every note or sing every note out loud or under your breath, you immediately are forced to play phrases, and that's really good. I find that really useful. I do it a lot. I do it on gigs. Often I'm kind of singing to myself. Sometimes it's out loud, but not usually on an acoustic gig, because it will be picked up through the mic. But that's a really good exercise to do as well. So yeah, I'm sure we'll talk about this topic again and keep coming back to it. But hopefully that gives you some ideas to help you along the way. So here's a question from my mate Nicky Kumar, and he's asking for some of the best ways to mix chords from sevenths to minor and major. Yeah, so when it comes to learning how chords fit together and what chords work well together and in what order, there are a few things that you can do to help get an understanding of this. The first thing would be to learn all the chords in a major key. So, for example, G major, A minor, B minor, C, D, which is usually a D7, E minor, and then F, minor 7 flat 5. Those are the chords that are found in G major, in the G major scale. There are lots of resources online to find this kind of stuff, but knowing that will really, really help you with putting sequences together. The next step really is to go and learn music. If you spend some time learning either some jazz standards or some pop songs or rock songs that use chord sequences well, for example the Beatles or something like that, you'll start to notice patterns, common patterns, and it is a very subjective thing. Certain genres will use certain sequences more than others, but there is a kind of underlying common ground with most music in kind of Western harmony. There's a certain gravity that chords have, and for example in jazz music it's very, very common to have a 2-5-1. It's also common to have a 1-6-2-5. And knowing a little bit about these sequences and noticing these sequences within other songs will really give you a kind of a vocabulary, in the same way learning lines will do the same. Understanding some of these common sequences is really useful and will make coming up with your own sequences way easier and give you inspiration as well. So that you're not just stabbing around in the dark. Before I learnt this kind of stuff, I'd just play a kind of chord shape that I like the sound of, and I might move some fingers around until I found something else that I like the sound of, but I didn't really have an understanding of what was going on. Now that's all well and good, you can come up with ideas that way, but you very often hit a wall. I want to do this, I want to take this song somewhere, and it's harder to do that if you don't have an understanding of chords. Now obviously this understanding can be kind of a almost subconscious thing. I mean, some of the great songwriters in pop music might not have understood or at least rationalised chord sequences in the same way a jazz musician might. But they have an understanding of the feeling of how chords work together. So they might not call it a 2-5-1, but they know that that movement has a certain sound to it, and so that could be useful for them. I'll give you a bit of an example, like if I was to take this chord here. So I found those 4 notes sound really nice to me, and then I go, that sounds nice as well. And I go back to this one, and then I think that one sounds nice as well. But if I had no understanding of what was going on there, this is just kind of mystery to me. But because I understand a bit of what's happening there, to me this is a 1, and this could be a 2, this could be back to a 1, and this could be a 5. So all of a sudden I know the kind of blueprint, and suddenly I can do something with that, I can add to it, I can take it places. So understanding sequences, 1 6 2 5s, 2 5 1s, very common in jazz. 1 dominant to a 4 minor. These sequences are worth knowing about, and the best way to learn them for me is to not find a book full of theory, but it's to go to music, go to a song that you like the sound of, learn that sequence, because that's the one that means most to you. That's the one you're going to most relate to. So listen to music and then find the things that really appeal to your ear, and just learn them and figure out what's going on, and you'll gradually you'll amass a kind of vocabulary and knowledge of music that will become really useful to you. And this is exactly the same approach to kind of improvising. When you learn phrases and lines and licks and things that you like and riffs that you like, and then you apply them all together and you put them into a big melting pot, and it leaves you with your own kind of improvising voice. Same thing goes for chord sequences. So that's kind of how I would approach that. Maybe in another video I'll actually go into some specific examples of sequences, but that's a more kind of general approach. Right, so we'll do one more question in this video. I think my answers for the last couple of questions were quite long, maybe a little too long, I'm not sure, but they are big topics and important topics, so I'm sure we'll talk about them again. But here's a question from Lee. I believe this was on Twitter, and he asks what guitar strings I use. So for quite a few years now I've been mostly using Newtone strings. Not sure if that will focus, but Newtone are a small company from the UK, and they make a whole load of different types of strings. They make silver-plated copper wound gypsy jazz style strings. They do bronze acoustic strings. They do nickel wound electric strings. They do bass strings, bass 6 strings, banjo strings, lots of different types. And the reason I started using them is because they make custom sets of strings to order, and it's probably the only string company that I'm aware of that will do that. And I started doing that because on acoustic guitars I don't use the standard set. I nearly always have a plain 3rd string, and that's because I come from electric guitar and I like to be able to do this kind of thing. And so you really need a plain 3rd to be able to do that kind of stuff. And so when I first started playing gypsy jazz guitar, I would be buying full sets of gypsy jazz strings, and I'd be giving away the 3rd string, and I'd be replacing it with a plain string that I'd just buy separately or take out of a set of electric strings or something. And when I found out that Newtone would do custom sets to order, I thought it was a great idea, so I thought I'd try them out, and really liked the strings. They sounded great, they felt great, so I started using them on my gypsy guitars. Then gradually over time I started trying their other strings out, so the bronze strings, the electric guitar strings. I have a bass 6, so that's really useful because bass 6 strings are quite hard to come by. And and that's great. And I'm often tinkering with string gauges as well. So, you know, I'll write to the guys at Newtone and say, can I have these gauges, and they come in a set specially made up with the string gauges you ordered. You can even choose if you have a round core or a hex core, which again, I don't really know of any other companies that where you can have that level of customization. So I have to express my gratitude to Neil at Newtone Strings for looking after me for all this time, and I recommend that anybody go and check their website out and see if they've got what you need. So yeah, Newtone Strings.